I'm very joyous and tremendously grateful today to have the opportunity to be in this space with Lorraine Goldbloom and also with her guests here. Lorraine, thank you so much for taking the time today.
It's a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah, and we'll be continuing your Finding Presence series. And what I thought I would do before we start with your topic for today, just for anyone who is listening or watching that maybe is not familiar with this, and this might be their first one, I didn't know if there's anything that you might want to share or kind of a brief recap, a little bit about the Finding Presence series and anything that you would want folks to know.
Oh, yes, thank you. Very briefly, I'm delighted with the way that the Finding Presence series has really taken off. It started just as a series of talks and healings as a way to, I teach something called VortexHealing. So I just started doing events to work with issues because VortexHealing is a healing modality. And so I just, do these healing events to give people a practical experience of what it is. And we will be doing one after the talk today with the guests that are here. But I found where people really began to resonate with the work is when I would talk about issues. And when I talk about how issues keep you out of being present. And, there are certain universal issues that we talk about, anxiety and depression and all of that. And people really began to understand, the nature of issue and the nature of healing when I began to create a focus. And so the Finding Presence series began as sort of creating a framework for that and talking about how our issues keep us out of presence and what it means to actually come back home to being present in the heart and what that means, when you can have the mind and the body and, all of that sense of self being aligned in the moment in presence. And so I guess we work with what we can. We work with what we need to. We work with what's in our face. And so we work with issues. And so by exploring them, dissecting them, providing a context for them, it makes them a lot more workable. And I found that instead of it being isolating for people, because, our issues tend to create isolation, don't they? Keep us in an experience, but by talking about it, it's actually bringing people together. So, the series began as healing events, and then I did a cable show through Oneness and Wellness in Massachusetts, and I've written articles, and now I'm here with you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to restructure this work and see where it goes.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's definitely been it's been beautiful just in the short time that I've been doing this with you, just to watch this taking shape this way. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be some small part of this with you. Thank you. Yeah. As far as the issue that you'll be exploring today with everyone, I thought I would go ahead and ask you to introduce that, and also kind of a compound question, if I could ask you, what that issue is, and then also asking you why you chose this specific issue for today. Anything you might share about that as well?
Yeah. What we've been doing is that every time we get together, we talk about, a different issue. And we've talked about the issue of shame, and we've talked about anxiety. And I really am very excited to do a session about intimacy. It's a very popular topic. It tends to get a lot of people tuning in, and intimacy itself is not an issue. But what we're really talking about here today are the issues that keep us, out of being present, that really prevent the intimacy from happening. And I think there's a lot of confusion, excuse me, about what intimacy really is. We imagine intimacy being, two beings coming together. You see that person from across the crowded room, and there's an instant connection, and the two become one. But actually, real intimacy is far more profound than that. And, Rick Wyman, who is the founder of VortexHealing, has a really good definition. And he talks about intimacy being divinity recognizing itself through form. Instead of two people coming together as one, actually the oneness recognizing itself through two forms. So in a way, the intimacy is already there. We don't actually have to connect. We just have to be present. But that's harder than it seems, because there are so many issues that get in the way of our being present. I mean, I hate to say this, but, so many of us have our own, our issues create a kind of agenda. And when we meet each other, when we see each other, it's very hard to be vulnerable enough to be willing to see and be seen. Very often we come to the moment with an agenda of what we want out of that person, what we want out of that moment, what we want to portray, what we're trying to connect to. All of this gets in the way, and we stop seeing each other. And, we're sort of looking to connect on a certain level, but in other ways, we're trying hard to protect ourselves on other levels. And we can't really have it both ways. And we were talking about that a couple sessions ago with the issue of shame, how we tend to hide even from ourselves, those places that feel unworthy of being loved. And then we overcompensate by trying to connect. And very often, I believe that we're craving intimacy from a place of feeling disconnected. And it's not until we're sort of willing to be vulnerable in the best sense of the word, and that word absolutely has negative connotations, but we're willing to be vulnerable in the best sense of the word, that we can just allow ourselves to really be seen and to see each other. And, very often we're worried about being seen. Do you know me? Do you see me? Are you connected with me? But, are we really seeing the rest of the world? Are we really seeing each other? Very often, we're not. It's hard. It's very hard.
And I was going to ask as well, just along the lines of, in terms of looking at this through the lens of survival issues, just being a human, living day to day, moment to moment, dealing with other people, just asking anything you might share in terms of how this can manifest itself in terms of intimacy or the fear of intimacy.
Oh, sure. I mean, survival is a core issue. And, if any issue is deep enough, we feel it on a survival level, and that need to connect, we need to connect to each other. We need to feel connected to each other. That is a survival thing. And when we feel we don't get it, or we don't get it in a kind of complete way that we imagine we need it, we really get scared and we overcompensate. And, we try to connect in all sorts of different ways. And I think, in the modern world, there's this sort of false sense of connection through social media. Where people, and I think social media can be used in a very positive way. I think it can actually bring people together in many wonderful ways, but very often there's kind of a false sense of connection. And we feel the lack, and coming from a sense of lack, we reach out again. And again, we're trying to connect, and we're trying to be seen from a place of feeling disconnected. We have our needs that really override the moment. And our agenda gets put on, who we want to connect with. And it takes a lot of courage, and it takes, I think, an ongoing practice of the willingness to sort of put that agenda down and just be who you're with. As soon as we start talking about intimacy, we imagine the romantic relationships. But I'm actually talking about, intimacy in a much broader sense. That casual conversation you have with, someone at the grocery market can be very intimate, in the sense that you are really, together in that moment. You're sharing, that moment, whatever that is, with that squishy avocado. That's, something that, everyone understands, and you can have a laugh at that, and you can sort of share that moment with just true joy and delight without agenda. And then we go home to our partners, and we need what we need, and we get what we get. And, so often we just fall into that from that sense of lack, and we just stop seeing each other. We talk about something in Vortex Healing called the relationship field. And the relationship field, it's sort of vortex healing language for something that happens between people. We have our relationships and we have our issues. And then we have sort of what we call the astral buildup between two people, which is the history, and we tend to begin to relate to people through the history that we've experienced with them. Like if you've been married to someone for 20 years, in some sense, you still see them, as they were, and people change. Hopefully they change, they grow, they develop. And yet we're not really seeing that. We're sort of working with an underlying pattern that was really established early on in the relationship. And at some point, very often, we're not seeing each other or being seen. And you hear that story, you wake up, oh, I don't even know you. Well, maybe you don't. Because have we really been looking? Have you just decided, oh, I know what you want. Oh, I know what you're going for. Oh, I know how you're going to react, without really stopping and listening and asking and allowing space, for the person that you're sharing time with. We do it all the time. And I think it takes a special kind of commitment to not do that, and a special kind of commitment to ourselves and everyone else to be willing to be vulnerable. And then what I said before about the best sense of that word gets a bad rap because I think we imagine vulnerability to be a weakness, and being oversensitive is like one of the worst insults you can hurl at someone these days, because it implies that, you're weak and you're putting responsibility on someone else to make you feel better and all of that. But the genuine vulnerability is really about an open heart and resilience. It's when you're no longer afraid to be hurt. It's just, I'm here with you, listening to you. I'm willing to be hurt, and maybe I am hurt and I'm still here. Right? Which is different from wearing your heart on the sleeve or holding someone else responsible for your feelings. It's truly just an open heart. And in that open heart, it's no longer about you, right? It's about, whoever you're being present with, be it, your partner, a casual friend, your cat, and your relationship to life changes when it's not about you. And there's freedom in that. And there's relaxation. And when you feel, you can relax, then people can relax in your presence because they feel seen and they feel held in a very tender, vulnerable way. And very quickly, a whole dynamic can change. When you demonstrate to someone that you're willing to put your agenda down and they feel seen and heard, it changes everything. But you have to be willing to do that. And that's very hard to do when we've known pain and we come from, places of self-protection and fear. It's just a natural part of being a karmic human being.
Yeah, and I was wondering too, this is just coming up in the moment in terms of intimacy, and I'm open to being off base, so to speak. Is there also some work, some level of work of creating intimacy with ourselves, where we can allow ourselves to be connected to ourselves and not who we think we are, or letting go of identities?
Absolutely. Excellent point and excellent question, because if we don't have compassion for ourselves, if we're not willing to just meet and be with our own issues, feeling, then we really can't be present with other people. Because if we're busy judging ourselves and our own feelings and beating ourselves up for being oversensitive and deciding that we should be a different way from what we are, we're not listening to the person talking to us. That's part of our own agenda, and so often we bring to the table, not what the other person needs, but, an anticipation of what we want to be in relation to that other person. We want to, even if it's well-meaning, we want to say the right thing. We want to do the right thing. We want to, that's all in relation to us. instead of putting that down and just, being there for them. And then responding in the moment spontaneously to whatever arises, it's a completely different thing. And if we can't do that with ourselves, if we're too busy judging ourselves, there's no way we can do it for other people. There's just no way.
Yeah. And then I was wondering too, if this is really an opportunity for people to do that, work into, I don't know really what you would call it, self-intimacy. I don't know if there even needs to be a name for it, but I'm wondering if there is really an opportunity or an invitation to discover things about ourselves that we were not even aware of. And then ultimately the lens with which we see other people, if there's that opportunity to, I believe you mentioned something related to that in terms of, seeing people and being with them, however they are, whoever they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it all comes down to presence. We were talking about in the sort of definitive episode of, finding presence, what does it mean to be present? It is where you can put all of that agenda down, where it's not that everything disappears, but, the mind and the body and the emotional sense of self come into alignment with the moment, so that you can be with whatever those feelings are, you can be with whatever those thoughts, you can be, but that's not what it's about. That stuff can be there, but you can be there with that moment. And there's freedom from that agenda, from those issues. I was talking about the presence class that's offered in Vortex Healing, which is a beautiful class that has, 3 aspects to it. It has a freedom aspect where we're, free from our own agendas and our own issues and our own, stories. We're free from that. We're also free to be a new way. We're free to listen. We're free to move forward. We're free to be a new way. But then, we're free here. We're not free outside somewhere. We're free here with you, in this space, in this heart, sharing this heart. But the key ingredient to the presence, of course, is the nowness of it. So, we're free here in this moment. And when you can bring that to the table, even though we always have issues, even though we always have stuff going on, that's enough for someone to feel held and seen and touched. And as we've talked about, presence responds well to presence. If someone feels seen, that's an intimate moment. That presence that's already there, underlying everything, just comes to the surface and everyone can relax. And the next moment arises and plays spontaneously, without any tension. And those are our most joyous moments, even if the context surrounding them is difficult. Even if something bad is happening or it's in the context of tragedy or something like that, there's a recognition of grace there because it just flows. And then we just kind of let go into that. And that's the person, we want to be, that's the person we want to be with. And that's the kind of relationship I think we really want from life. But we're so busy in trying to connect from the place that we feel we need to, we've lost contact with the natural connection that's already there. We don't need to connect, we just need to recognize the connection that's there. That's hard to do.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I feel like that's so uniquely human, isn't it? That, we feel like there's something we need to do, or we need to be someone doing something, when in fact this presence is always here, and then it's just a matter of recognizing it and being open to it, which I know I'm making it probably sound a lot more simple than it is, or a lot less painful than it can be sometimes. But
well, I think in essence it is simple.
Yeah.
We complicate it. We're afraid of the simplicity of the moment. Absolutely. I think we just can't imagine that it could be that simple. We have to bring an agenda to it. We have to make the other person feel a certain way so that we can feel a certain way, so that whatever, and so we are afraid of that, simplicity. But it means a lot to people when we're willing to put our stuff down. I might have told this story before, so forgive me if I repeat myself, but I have two stepsons, and when they graduated college, I wrote them each a note, a letter, to go with their present. And I basically said to them, each of them, and they're very different personalities, both wonderful, completely different personalities. But I said to each of them that, I recognize that you're different now from how you were growing up. You're not the little boy that I knew growing up. And I want you to know that I'm looking forward to getting to know you as the young man that you are now. And I think it meant a lot to each of them in different ways because they felt seen. And the fact of the matter is, they weren't the children I grew up with. They're completely different people. They have their own ideas and, experiencing the world from a different kind of point of view. And basically what I was doing is I was promising to make the effort to recognize their ongoing growth. And give them credit for changing and growing and looking forward to see where that process takes them, instead of just imposing my old, ideas of what they should be like. We do that to our partners. We do it to our children all the time, and they hate it. Understandably.
Yes.
Of course they do, because they're not feeling seen.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you too, just, looking at the past, what has it been, 2.5 years now? I'm not exactly sure how long we've been dealing with the pandemic. I was going to ask you just in terms of connection with other people and how that has affected intimacy. Just anything that you might share. I guess what I'd call it, life in the public sphere, as well as also, with relationships. Anything that you might share in terms of what you have seen or what people have shared with you. Regarding, this,
it's certainly been very challenging, and feeling disconnected is it's a hard thing. As a matter of fact, I think our next issue that I'd like to explore is loneliness. And I think people have been feeling very isolated during the pandemic, but I also think that people have found, they've sort of had to look hard at this stuff and where they're feeling disconnected and how they can really come together. And at what moments do they really feel that intimacy? I think it's forced us to really take a look at that, what we've been missing. It's easy when there's so much noise around to be distracted and not realizing that we're not really being, seen and met. But when things go still and quiet, then we really feel it. And then we long to work with that. So I think a lot of the issues that we have always had presented themselves. Everything sort of came up in our faces because everything just became more obvious. The isolation that we were already experiencing became more obvious. And so we have been forced to deal with that in certain ways. And that is uncomfortable, but can also be very healthy. And people have found new ways of coming together and creating groups and forming friendships and all of that. I had the pleasure of meeting someone in person, someone who works for me. I had never met them in person. I'd known them well, we've been working together. And then recently I had the opportunity, I've taught an in-person class for the first time since COVID, and they came. And I was delighted to meet them in person and give them a hug. And it was and I realized, that intimacy was there. It just was forged from a different place in a different way. So it can be done, but we have to pay attention to that, and we have to make our commitment to it.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, I believe, if I remember correctly, some of what you were speaking with is that sometimes that as humans, we come at this in terms of how we connect or don't connect with other people through a sense of our own lack. I don't know if that's a good word for that or not, but I was curious, anything that you might share just, about that sense of lack, that it is sometimes very human for us to find ourselves coming from the perspective of that when we're dealing with others.
Lack is a great issue. It's worth its own session. Where do you feel in lack? Where do you feel, your needs aren't getting met, and I think like I said, we crave intimacy from that place where we believe that we are disconnected. And so we charge forth with agenda. It's just that we have this preconceived idea of what connection means and what intimacy looks like, and it looks like, I'm a very mental person myself. So I'm looking to connect on a very mental level. And I feel seen when someone, has that way of, other people are more emotionally based and they relate. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. But when we, create a focus in that, and that's my definition of intimacy when I'm being met on a mental level or on an emotional level, we lose the deeper presence of it, where, there is no connection because there was never any disconnection. The real intimacy is just relaxing into the presence of the moment. But when we come from a place of lack, we can't see that because all we can think of is meeting that need and fulfilling that lack. So that intimacy becomes impossible because we're always chasing that.
Yeah. Do you find that just anything you might speak to in terms of the healing possibilities when someone is willing to own that? In other words, once they actively take responsibility for that sense of lack and
Oh,
how that
absolutely. I
manifests
mean,
itself.
Transformation is possible once you see an issue for what it is, which is why we're doing the series. Once you kind of recognize, oh, I do that. Oh my God, I didn't realize I was imposing that on that relationship. Oh, I knew I did it over here, but I'm doing it everywhere across, the board. Then we have the opportunity to just work with it. We have vortex healing tools, but just meeting it and being willing to put it down is huge. Before Vortex, I have a story. Maybe I've told this, maybe I haven't. I call it the day I realized I was full of shit story. Can I say that? The day it was a Tuesday. Great. I remember it well. And wow. What happened in very briefly is that I was in the process of, it has to do with intimacy and coming from a place of lack. I was in the process of getting my yoga teacher training certification, and I was doing a practice practical, meaning it was sort of like a rehearsal for the exam. And I was leading a class, my fellow classmates through an asana practice, and I was being evaluated by the teachers. And when I got my feedback, it surprised me because I was feeling all kinds of good about myself because I was already comfortable leading groups, and I had a background as a personal trainer, and I kind of knew my stuff, and I was like, I got this, and their feedback was in short, well, your stuff, Lorraine, but you're more invested in showing off what you know than actually helping the people you're working with. And when they said that to me, it really hit me hard because I realized it was true. Not because I didn't care, not because I didn't want to help them, but I realized that coming from a very deep place of insecurity, I'm by nature a very insecure person, and I really wanted to perform well. And in that wanting to perform well, I wanted to demonstrate my knowledge and do it right. And in that moment, that actually was more important to me than listening and working with the people that I was trying to help. And that read loud and clear. And I got that feedback, and I went home and I cried because I realized what I would like to say to you is I just did it in that moment because I was nervous. But what I realized is that I was doing that all the time, that deep insecurity was a pattern that I was bringing to my personal training clients and other work that I was doing, and that had created this sense of like armor, an armor of self-protection. And I wasn't seeing or allowing myself to be seen, and I wasn't really intimate with the world in that way. And I didn't have any tools. All I could do in the moment was just know that that's not what I wanted to be. That's not the person I am. So I just made a decision the next day when I went to work and worked with that first client. I was going to put my agenda down and just listen to them and bring whatever I could to the table to help them, and then do the same with the next, and then do the same with the next. And it just became a practice of that. And then, my experience and my tools would come to play, but they came into play from service of supporting, which is a very different place. And I just made a commitment to take on the deeper issues of insecurity, of self-worth that created this wall. And so to answer your question, coming from that, place of lack, when you recognize that, that's life-changing. Because then you have the opportunity to meet it in compassion and not judge it, because then that creates another side story, and just keep going and say, no, this is more important to me than anything else. And then we just do the best we can. And, and then later I got VortexHealing tools, and that was life-changing, and I could work with those issues in a different way. But it's still the same process of meeting each moment as it comes, catching yourself when you have an agenda, and maintaining the willingness to put it down and really be vulnerable. And like I said, you can't really be vulnerable unless you have the resilience to know that you can be hurt and be okay. When you feel like, no, it won't be okay if I'm hurt, well, then you can't allow yourself to be vulnerable. But being hurt and being hurt again is like, okay, I'm willing to do this because I care. That's what I was saying about the resiliency. And that's what we do. That's the best we can do. So we keep going.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. This has been has been incredibly nourishing on numerous levels. I think that is all the questions that are coming up for me intuitively. So what I thought I would do is really just open things up and just give any of your guests, the space and time that they need if they have any questions. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. If any of you have been listening, my friends, my peeps, if you have any questions or comments, you make the discussion so much more rich. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask or offer in terms of the subject of intimacy or your experience with it? Denise, how are you doing today?
Hello, happy to be here. An interesting question popped into my head, which is, how do intimacy and boundaries relate? Because we were talking about being present and putting down our own agenda, which is a beautiful thing,
Right.
to actually be there. But then for me, the question arises, how do boundaries fit into that? Are you putting down your boundaries as well? And what are your thoughts on intimacy and boundaries?
That's an excellent question, because I'm talking about vulnerability. So naturally, that's scary. And where does personal boundary come into play? I think, in the presence of the moment, when there's no agenda, how to act and what's really happening in the moment is clear. So if, you're really showing up for someone, you're listening, it becomes very clear very quickly if that other person has an agenda. And then how to navigate that becomes very clear, and say, hey, I was here to, support you in this, but it's going here. Do you realize that? We don't have to sort of come in ready to go, because when we're present in the moment, we see exactly what's going on. So that's just coming from a place of recognition as opposed to a place of fear. You assume that it's not, there's nothing that you need to protect yourself against, and if something happens, you do get hurt, well, then there's resilience in that. You don't check your mind at the door. You don't check your reason at the door for presence. That's part of the moment. And if someone oversteps their boundaries, you'll also have the presence of mind to recognize, well, maybe they're coming from a place of pain or reaction, in which case you'll be able to handle that better if you see it for what it is. So I found my best moments when I've been able to navigate something tricky is when I've actually been softer, when I've been able to really, put my agenda down. Then it's very clear what to do. When I come in with my boundaries set, well, then it becomes sort of a push-pull thing. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
It's a good question. That's good. And again, vulnerability, we have this idea that it's oversensitivity. And again, it's become like a modern day, you're being oversensitive, And I think that comes from a habit we all have sometimes of when we feel badly, we hold the other person responsible for either why we feel badly or making us feel better. And that's what oversensitivity means. And that's why we resent it when someone is, being oversensitive. But if you can just say, hey, I'm hurt, or that is, making me uncomfortable in this moment, without necessarily making it someone else's fault, that's a whole different dynamic. And that's actually the greatest strength when you can do that, and it's an interesting conversation too. How can you, it's a little segue from what you're asking, but how do you call someone on their stuff without judging them for it? It's very tricky to do. And it requires saying, hey, that really hurt me. This is how I'm receiving this. I'm not sure if that's what you're intending, but this is how it's landing. What did you mean? When you come from that place, instead of saying, hey, that's wrong, and that's a completely different dynamic you have. That requires vulnerability. That's hard to do. That's hard to do. Thank you. Good. Anyone else? John, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. I guess listening to what you just, Denise's question sort of made a lot of sense to me, but then I started thinking about it more. And, if I like swap out the word vulnerability to like open heart, or being sort of an open vessel, or open to whatever is going to happen, that then I would come to a situation in a different sort of emotional position. And then by observing what's really happening, you're observing more clearly what's happening, but then two, it may not trigger the other person into reacting, maybe if it's a potentially hostile or uncomfortable situation. And so that it could diffuse it, or you just may actually see something that maybe you haven't seen before, or experience or feel something that because if you're coming guarded, then you may be closing yourself off to something. And I did think earlier when you were talking about divinity recognizing itself through form.
Yeah.
I felt like I always thought of that as being like singular, like divinity sort of reaching down through me to experience the world, or through a being. But then when you think of like the divinity coming through two forms, and it's like two people sort of meeting each other to have some sort of experience, whatever that turns out to be. I guess I never had thought of it that way. And that, so everyone that we meet is an opportunity to, I guess, reflect, or to see, experience divinity coming through their form, through your form, to meet, to have some sort of interaction, whatever that may be. And then the more present, or the more open or vulnerable we are, then maybe there's more truth to the whole experience. And that, so I found that very profound. So thank you for
yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, your first point is it's hard to argue with an open heart. How do you hold up with your separation conscious and your guardedness to a heart that's really open, and that innocence maybe innocence is a better word than vulnerability, because vulnerability has such a negative. I like the word vulnerability simply because it says I'm here, I feel safe enough, I have a willingness to be hurt if that's what it takes, and I'm still here. And that comes from a deep place of love. But the real intimacy and what you're talking about, the divine recognizing itself through form, when you first catch eyes with someone and you might not even know them very well, but there is this something that's greater than the two individuals. There is an underlying recognition that there is something there that is bigger than your past history or your backstory. You can have this with someone that you don't know. It is an incredibly intimate, realization, because it's so much greater than you are. And it's so much about heart opening, and it's so much about presence. And it just happens when we're not looking for it. It happens when we've put our guard down, or we've been caught, off guard in some way. It's just there. And so those intimate experiences are happening all the time if we just allow ourselves to see it and enjoy it and appreciate it for what it is. But if there's only one divine, if there's only one God, if there's only one, if that's true, then everything that we are and everyone else is an expression of that one. And that one plays, and it meets itself, and it dances through form, and it recognizes itself in those beautiful, joyful moments. And for us to appreciate that, we have to be willing to put our own issues, agendas, stories down. And so we do our best to come back to, finding that presence that's already there.
Yeah, I guess that sort of happened to me twice just recently in the last day or so. And as you're talking about it, I sort of thought, like, what did that really mean? Or did it mean anything? But what it comes down to, what I thought, or what I think now, is that, like, for that moment, I see you, and somehow you're seeing me, and we don't even know each other. It happens in New York quite a bit, because it's so crowded. But it's just like, oh, I see him or see her, and she's seeing me. She's seeing the anger in me. I'm seeing her judgment in me, or whatever it was, and sometimes it's joy, sometimes it's all kinds of other things. But I was just like, oh, I see them.
Yeah.
They must be seeing me.
Yeah.
For whatever it was. Yeah.
And that's incredibly intimate. It's very beautiful, even if the moment is painful. Even if you see someone on the subway and they're in pain, but they're seen, and it is beautiful. We just sort of recognize that through form. And if it's seen and it's safe enough to be seen, then there's always that room for transformation. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, John. Good. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Andrea, how are you doing today?
Hi, how are you? I'm enjoying so much this presentation and this discussion. Thank you so much, you all, because it really helped me today. Because hearing you all talk to each other and discuss, and the questions you asked, it made me realize that I have all these fears, I have all these boundaries, I have all these things that you were talking about. But also, I at some point, I start feeling that I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I started to feel a lot of love. This is all about love.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I am truly feeling that. And I'm very moved. So thank you so much.
Beautiful. And I'm glad you used the word love, because, when you're talking about intimacy, you should be talking about love. Love is the open heart. That's what love is. It's that open heart. It's that divinity that's there. Unconditional love is intimacy, and it's presence. It's all, it's all the same thing at the end of the day. So when we have, space for that, and we allow ourselves the opportunity to recognize that, we're held in love.
Exactly.
And we
Exactly.
hold others in love. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a whole different way of navigating the world.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you. Good. Okay. Well, thank you all for your questions and contributions. I think that's really nice.
Thanks so much, Lorraine. I wanted to thank you and your guests that were here today, and for all the wonderful questions and everything that you shared. And this has definitely been a very healing conversation, I would call it. Thank you. Yeah.
Good. Thank you all.